his death. And the family has addressed and asked that the DA open a formal investigation, and the family has also requested a meeting with DA Crusoe. But the main thing is, we believe that families are having to deal with the loss of loved ones, and then they're being taken advantage of after the loved one dies. Mr. Jefferson will speak to what his goal and his plan is, and how Attorney Merritt's actions has harmed him and some of the stresses put on him. And then Mr. Walker will speak to his relationship with Lee Merritt and how it has affected some of the organizations that he operates under. The main thing is, as we're all fathers, we've talked and we've tried to figure out, how do we have impact in the city that we're from, that we grew up in, that we went to high school in, that we have family in, and how do we protect them after they're already dealing with senseless violence in many cases. And we believe that the trust has been broken amongst lawyers. We believe our judicial system also has given us many reasons to have distrust, along with our elected officials. So at some point, we have to start doing the things on the inside. And it doesn't matter if a person's black or white, but we cannot no longer sit back and give people passes because they're black. I'm going to pass this to Mr. Jefferson.
Mr. Jefferson, could you first of all spell your first name for me?
Okay, my first name is LaPaca, L-A-P-A-C-A, Jefferson.
You're the uncle, correct?
Yes.
Brother of Marquise.
Right, I'm his younger brother.
Okay. Go right ahead, sir.
First of all, I want to say I'm still kind of heartbroken myself, and my mind is still trying to wrap around what's really going on. How I still vision at night how my brother deteriorated in 28 days from a broken heart, how he just really gave up on life. And I had put together a foundation for him in honor of his daughter. And the court some kind of way put some kind of gag on it that we couldn't even mention it. And what lit him up, that foundation also tore him down because we couldn't even mention it, not even at her funeral. And I also, I did some events in St. Louis, right here. And I had to cancel it because I found out about a permanent injunction that I never got served. So that was canceled after me spending lots of money doing that. My goal was just to do something good, to carry on my brother's last wishes. Actually, I was there when he took his last breath, and I was talking to Bruce, and I told Bruce, I said, I think he's gone, Bruce. And he said, what do you mean? And then I passed the phone to the doctor. But like I say, I'm still mourning and grieving from my brother, so thank you.
Can I ask just a quick question about this, sir, because I want clarity.
Okay.
We're aware that there was, for lack of a better term, tension. But what you're suggesting here, based on what I've read, is the actions of others contributed to the impact of your brother, which ultimately caused his death. And I want to be focused on that because those are very serious kinds of statements.
Right.
So I want you to speak to if this is what you believe, and what can be done about that. It's no different than if I walk, if you will, if I walked in here with a camera and somebody doesn't like cameras, they're nervous about cameras, and unfortunately something happens to them because that camera was rolling. Why is it my responsibility? That's where I want to get an understanding.
Well, my understanding is that they intentionally cause stress, unnecessary stress and problems to my brother. For example, at my niece's funeral, someone tried to serve papers, summons papers or some kind of papers for the gag order for him to report. And Bruce was pushing him right behind the casket. I mean, that's unnecessary stress there. So I believe it was planned.
Explain to me a little bit more about, for those that might not be aware, I guess, just a little bit about that order and what it said.
Well, I really didn't really read it, but it was, the understanding that I got was that you can't mention the foundation. That was the only thing that gave him a reason to live, and that was took from him.
And who exactly made that judgment that they couldn't even mention that? I mean, what does that make you feel, just as a family member, that, you know, yeah, you had your brother's, I guess, last wish, and kind of that was taken away?
Well, I'm really not understanding how a person can prevent anyone from doing something good. This is what I don't really understand. That's all I want to do is bring about something good to remember them by.
And was it your understanding, sir, that Mr. Merritt was advocating and supporting at least some members of the family, Tatiana's family, on their behalf? I know there seemed to be some disagreement here, but my interpretation of it was that he was being, for lack of a better term, acquired and prepared to be compensated to represent members of the family, and did so appropriately. And so the argument that you and others have made, that somehow him representing Ms. Carr and the others was hurting or harming Mr. Jefferson.
Yes, it was. But when I first saw him, he was saying that he represented the Jefferson family. It wasn't the Carr family. And every time he was shown on the news, it had Jefferson family. Neither one of those people that was there was Jeffersons. And that's where I felt disrespected.
Let me just quickly transition, because your issues are clearly separate. Yours is more of about issue of them co-opting a trademark, what you symbolize, what an organization that you helped cultivate. Go ahead. Before I ask some questions, you can certainly.
No, I was gonna just shift in here. If you
Okay,
don't
all right,
mind.
very
Okay.
good, very good.
Steve, I want to follow up on your direct question. If you thought that Attorney Lee Merritt's representation of the other side of the family is what he was doing. Mr. Jefferson sent an email on the 13th requesting that Lee Merritt do not raise funds in Tatiana's name as far as the funeral, specifically the funeral, because he had insurance. And as a dad, he had taken his responsibility serious since she was 8 years old. As I said, we're all fathers, and we're black fathers, and we know that black men get a huge rap about not being available for their children. And so when a father says, I got this, there's something inside of you that should perk and say, let him pay for the funeral. And instead of honoring that, it was a double down to hold a press conference to discredit him at a national level. So now you're talking about undue stress intentionally. So it's for those reasons. And when you look at attorney fees that was paid by somebody to an alarming rate of $9,000 a day for attorneys who sometimes don't make that in a month. So you have to look at the entire path of what happened in 28 days to fully understand that it's bad business from those that you ask us to trust. And so if you require us or want us to have representation in a courtroom and we don't trust the representation, many of us feel like we need to try to fight this battle our own in court. And those are some of the systemic issues that we have amongst, I'll say, at least people of colors. Who do we trust? And I think those are some of the foundational principles of why we're here together and why we continue to fight causes like this. So we want to change our urban cores and what's going on we got to start really holding each other accountable.
Let me just follow up by asking in this manner. There's a distinction by raising the ethical conduct of Mr. Merritt or others on how they went about doing this, even with input from Mr. Jefferson. There's a big difference, I would submit to you, to say, but he also, those actions caused the death of a person.
I will say this. It's easy to get behind a white police officer and come against him when he shoots an unarmed black man. Everybody's on the rah, rah, rah. But if the same actions take place and someone dies, then there should be the same rah, rah, rah. Because at the end of the day, he doesn't have his brother who he was 1 year younger than anymore. And so if you take Mr. Jefferson, who even in his asthmatic state he'd had for years, he was the employee of the year at the community college. He was a math teacher. He was a volunteer, not for one organization, two organizations. And he had lived this life for decades. So the question becomes, what happened in 28 days that was different than the rest of his life? And so you have to look at those 28 days that caused his death. And so I'm not going to place every fault on Aaron Dean, because he surely plays a role, but there were so many other contributing factors that came in. So in the commission of a crime, when you talk about fraudery that was involved in this case, you talk about fraud that took place, then if in the commission of a crime, a murder or a death happens, you can be made liable for the murder. And that's something that the DA and the special prosecutors have to look at and see if there's merit to it. But it's okay to bring it and bring facts with it to see what it says. Because at the end of the day, Mr. Jefferson's not here anymore. Ernest, you go ahead and.
I'm Ernest Walker. I'm a chaplain, ERNEST, WAALKER. I'm here today, first of all, to say I think the world's a better place with Lee Merritt. The Lee Merritt that champions issues for people who can't speak for themselves. But when that becomes a vanity issue, or we begin to say and do things to harm those same families, then as a black community and as black men standing together, we have to unite and get rid of the no snitch policy and sweep around our community's front door. And we're saying today that although he's like a son to me, sometimes you have to reprimand your son. We keep talking about police and judges and bail reform. We have to start looking at our own communities. If we believe Black Lives Matter, we got to believe it ourselves. And we got to stop the no snitch in our communities. And attorneys should be held to a higher standard, and there should be a watchdog. Yeah, you have the bar, but it has no teeth. Somewhat similar to the Police Review Board. It has no teeth. There are people out here hurting, and they go to people like the Lee Merritts and the attorneys, and they need help. And these attorneys sometimes charge them exorbitant amount of fees. They put their mortgages, sometimes they even put liens on their homes to try to get representation to keep their family members just to serve and keep them out of harm's way. And these attorneys are the people who are using, in my opinion, what I've experienced with a few attorneys, bullying tactics with their clients. It's bullying because their clients in a lot of cases don't know the law. They're desperate, they're in need, and they're just as susceptible to an attorney twisting their words as an officer when they're given a statement on the side of a road. So we're saying enough is enough. Mr. Merritt was served with a cease and desist order recently on October 30th or somewhere there around there. He had time to respond. Mr. Merritt has not responded. Obviously, this hits us home because we're the American Black Cross. And my wife and I have taken our lifetime, the last 3 years, and everything we've done over 25 years and put our heart and soul in building a organization that's about helping people. Yeah, it says the American Black Cross, but the black means we operate in the black. We take no salaries, all volunteer. Mr. Merritt, as I show you in these documents, and I have other documents, from the beginning, has misused our organization and its name for political purposes, and you and I both know that nonprofits cannot engage in political rhetoric. Last but not least, he's used our name to solicit funds across the nation, and with someone with a platform as large as his, that can be damaging. It became apparent recently when we tried to help Mrs. Stevenson in Lancaster, Texas, with rebuilding her home after the tornado in 2012. Well, we tried to raise funds and we received all kind of phone calls. Well, that's Lee Merritt's organization, and why are y'all doing this? No, Lee presented himself in this way, okay? And I have documentation all the way back for the last 3 years and more to prove that that is not the case. So you can look at this press release yourself. There are also, I have proof that Lee Merritt has started at least 2 or 3 GoFundMe's in our company's name, our organization's name, even our Feed a Million veterans here, and he's raised funds for the purpose of helping us. This is the house of Mr. Hogue, the last Tuskegee Airman that's alive. We redid his home 2 years ago. Mr. Merritt raised funds, we never saw a dime of that. We put our own personal funds in there. This is fact, people. You go on through these documents, you'll see where Mr. Merritt also sent letters to the DA. This is to DA Johnson, Faith Johnson, using the American Black Cross logo in a legal matter. He cannot do that. Last but not least, I'll take a step back. When confronted with this, he and an organization named the Oasis out of Richardson, the Oasis Foundation, is Sterling Oasis Community and Economic. I was given a check of $5,000 from Lee Merritt, from that organization, to keep us quiet. I returned that check. I'm not for sale. My community is not for sale. My integrity is not for sale. The American Black Cross is not for sale. And I returned this check. Our attorney at the time, which was Daniel White, for some reason, he began to work for the opposite side. Here I go. I can name another attorney. Every time we engage an African-American attorney's community, it seems like they know each other. They are part of an elite group who are living off the plight and problems of the community, and they're the go-between. And they have set themselves up. I mean, you know, there are people that feel attorneys, the only good one you can find is at the bottom of an ocean. But I don't believe that. Again, as you see on my picture, this is Lee Merritt, this is me. I love him. We are responsible for him, one of the people responsible for him even coming to Dallas. And I will love him till tomorrow. But we have to start cleaning up. We got to hold our elected officials accountable, our attorneys, our officers, anyone that misrepresents our community, we must call them out before we start talking to other people about helping our community.
Mr. Walker, let me ask you a quick question on this, and I think your shirt represents my question. Did you only become concerned about Mr. Merritt's efforts when he didn't, when he used this tool, this format of raising funds through GoFundMe, or using your term, your organization, because the argument has always been that is the way in which poor people are not able to pay, so they go through GoFundMe accounts, and you all are side by side with him in those efforts. Is it an issue now because they did so under your name and you don't get the money as well? That I've heard that argument already, that you're arguing against someone that you were side by side doing the same exact thing.
I've never asked Lee Merritt to start a GoFundMe. Our organization is the American Black Cross. We operate in the black. We don't take funding. We have no grants. My wife and I have funded this for the last 25 years. I don't want a dime or anything, as Mr. Jefferson didn't want any of the $250,000. I'm not motivated by money. I make money, money doesn't make me. So with this organization was concerned, I have served Lee Merritt notice 3 years ago. I have documentation, cease and desist, text messages, phone calls, letters, saying stop using our name and stop collecting funds on our behalf. We're doing fine. I didn't need one dime from Lee Merritt. All I want is his honesty and his integrity. as should be from a person in with his position in the community, that we need to hold Lee Merritt and other attorneys to higher standards.
Do you think, with the national recognition that Lee Merritt has now, and he's taken on cases now that up in Kansas City yesterday, he took up a case. What would you have to say to people that are seeking his counsel in other parts of this country, not just here now?
Let me say this. I've had issues where I need a civil rights attorney. And before Lee Merritt got here, you can call the Bar Association. They didn't have a civil rights attorney listed. So with that in mind, a lot of these cases that Lee Merritt, such as Jacqueline Craig and Jordan Edwards, they would have no national attention without him and his connection with Shaun King. Credit, but that comes with responsibility. So with that in mind, I would say to anyone, check his record. If you need publicity, Lee Merritt is the person there. But where are these cases being tried? Where's the conclusion of these cases? Are these cases being sold? Are they being farmed out to other attorney firms? There's a lot of questions there. But if you need publicity, which a lot of these cases would not go anywhere without the light that he and Shaun King shed, but there's a responsibility that goes with that.
I just as a follow-up to his question, less than a week ago, Mr. Merritt was standing shoulder to shoulder with the Botham Jean family.
Correct.
And so the concern seems to be, and the argument has been made, that there are individuals who don't like the productivity, the effectiveness of Mr. Merritt and others, and you all have been called out to stop him by questioning his ethics, his efforts, and if black men do it, then nobody will question it. Is that a fair argument that you all are being used yourselves?
No one has called me. I'm here on my own.
I think what you do is, you look at a complete body of work. You heard Mr. Walker talk about his 25 years of service. Me and Mr. Jefferson Bond we were on a 40-day, 40-night tour going into 13 cities across 11 states when we saw it coming into Houston that a young lady had been killed in Fort Worth. So it's a work here. But at the problem that we have right now in America, and especially in our urban cores, we don't have enough black men that will stand up and call things out. And when you don't call them out, you're mad at every other race and every other issue, but some of the issues you must call out. So if I believe there's a term called an ambulance chaser. I believe there's a term called a death chaser. You cannot effectively represent everyone anyway when you don't have a law firm that has funds. So if you represent yourself as this great and almighty black civil rights leader, but you take your case and you sell it off to white firms to go and represent people who they would never go to, then I think there is some deception there anyway. So no is the response.
And let me add to this. If you know me, when Jordan Edwards was shot in Box Springs, I stood with the chief. Do you know how many of my people didn't like that? But I'm never afraid to stand on my own. Some people have to stand up, and that's what we're doing today. Now, some of our issues are different. Some of our approach are different, but our issues are the same. We're trying to create a watchdog situation with these attorneys who are misusing cases and or misrepresenting people in many situations. If we don't stand, who will? Who's going to stand for the common person when an attorney has complete control over his life? I've been there. You sign your life over to an attorney and he represents you and you're afraid to say anything for fear of retribution. Well, I can stand on my own because nobody in my community pays my bills. No one asked me to be here. I'm here on my own merit, no pun intended.
I don't know about these others, let me just ask you finally about, I make the distinction that it is a more, for lack of a better term, more serious accusation that the efforts and actions of this attorney, Mr. Merritt, caused the death of an individual.
Let me be
That
clear.
those are very, very.
Let me be clear and let me make this a statement. I believe, because I was there, with the lack of judging by Judge Brenda Hull Thompson, who had the ability to bring all of this to an end,